Hey, AP government students. It's Friday morning, the day after leaf collecting, and we're losing a lot of instructional time for just a variety of things. And we've got a short semester anyway because we started a week later than we might have normally. So I'm describing here something that I would like to do in class because I can demand your attention a little bit more. But I'm just doing this video on this poll report that you have to write. And so let me just kind of tie pieces together for you. You have this data analysis that you've done. And then at the end, you had to ask 3 questions of yourself. And I wanted you to write them and then tabulate the results. And just to kind of help you, maybe come back to that just a little bit. You just approach it with a lot of curiosity, and also as we learn about ideology, as we learn about what conservatives believe, what liberals believe, and as we learn about socialization, and that's what maybe how we get our political beliefs. And then the last little piece that we haven't talked about yet is this idea of what groups tend to be more this or that. Do women tend to be more liberal or conservative? Do suburban people tend to believe differently politically than urban people? Do, again, people with more education, do they tend to be more conservative or liberal or things like that? But after you learn all that, hopefully you get a chance to try it. You get a chance to test to see if Granville kind of fits and the data we collected kind of fits what we've learned. And you approach it just inquisitively. And so, here's your demographic data that we asked: gender, education level, ideology, age, and where they get their news. And then here's some of the questions. I don't think all of them are quite up here, but the Israel-Ukraine world involvement, approval rating for Trump, ICE raids, deportation, what they believed about that, tariffs, healthcare, and inflation. What I really wanted you to do is just with curiosity start to say, I wonder if older people like Trump more than younger, in which case you are taking the approval rating of Trump and cross-tabulating it with age or age level. Okay, or I wonder if people who have more education are worried about inflation more or less than people with less education. And that maybe again that's based on the idea maybe if you're wealthier, price changes don't affect you as much, or you make money and all of your contracts, your salaries are based on cost of living adjustments. So inflation doesn't bother you, where somebody who's low income might not have that assurance, and therefore inflation might really bother them more. Anyway, you come at it with some questions that you have, and then you say, I wonder if that's true here. Things like that. Ideology would be interesting too. Do conservatives feel differently about Ukraine and Israel than liberals? Okay. And again, gender is a really important one because there are large gender gaps where men and women are quite different on things, especially as it relates to security, foreign policy. Should we go to war? Should we not? There's often pretty big gender gaps. It would be interesting to look at gender as it relates to deportation, ICE raids, things like that. Again, the hypothesis I would have is that women might be more not in favor of those things. But anyway, you have all of these things to potentially test. And by the way, that may be review, and I want you to stay with me here. But after you test that data and after you come up with your 3 questions over here, you really start to drill down on one of them, okay? And you take one of them and you say, okay, I found some interesting things there. I think I would like to present it as a report, okay? And here you see your AP government assignment poll research. And what you're going to do is do a little bit of political science here, where you then write a report on it. And this is where you're advancing knowledge. You're advancing knowledge through research. And as part of this, you're going to take the heart of the question you asked, and you're going to create a report all around it. And in the report, you're going to have an introduction, which explains how we constructed our poll and what you're interested in. In addition, you're going to have a thesis or a hook, and then at the end of your first section, you're going to have a hypothesis where you state what you thought. By the way, you might already know the answer because you've run it over there, but you have to go back to what you originally thought. By the way, having a wrong hypothesis, having a hypothesis that is not supported, does not make your paper a bad thing. Okay, it just shows that you learned. And the bigger process with these poll reports and scientific research isn't being right or wrong; it's going through the process of good science. Okay. So a hypothesis, and then what you expect to find out and why, and then you're going to analyze it. You're going to say, well, here's our data, and you're going to put it in a table format, okay? And you're going to compare your data to other questions that might be kind of the same here. And then at some point, you're going to try to find a poll from the whole nation or from the whole state. And you're going to say, here's how our Granville question was answered across the nation. And then obviously you're going to see some similarities where the Granville data is kind of the same as our nation. In which case you might say, yeah, that shows that our data is strong and good because it does match national data. It could be that our data in Granville is different, in which case we have to ask the question, is it because our poll was bad, or was it because Granville is different than the rest of the nation or the rest of the state? So you're going to go through that, and then you're going to have a conclusion where you then tie it all up. And again, not real long, maybe 2.5, 3 pages is what you're going to write. What I do like about this kind of presentation and working with data, one, there should be, it should be hard to plagiarize, okay? Because you're working with our data. You don't go out there and find other data, except for a real quick comparison with national data. So it's our data, so you don't have to plagiarize it. And by the way, don't try to AI it either, where you put in our data and you say, write a paper for me. I'll try to figure that out. That's obviously a newer thing, but don't do that because I don't think the potential downfall is worth it. Especially because the other thing I like about this kind of writing is the papers kind of write themselves. Okay, they're not hard to write, and I don't love writing research papers, but if you just pose a really good question, and then you just answer it in this way, you just go through the steps and it kind of takes care of itself. It writes itself, okay? And I will talk about this a little bit in class, but I just want you to kind of hold with me on that. I am going to show you a sample this is from a few years ago. And in doing so, maybe you can say, oh yeah, I can kind of get it. So this was right during COVID. And at that point, the state of Michigan and other states were doing vaccine mandates. If you had a business and you had over 100 people in it, the state and the national governments were saying you need to test, if you're a business, you need to test your employees, excuse me, not test, you need to require your employees get a COVID vaccine before they work. And it was a pretty controversial thing. And we asked it in Granville whether people thought that was an appropriate thing for a government to ask a business to do. Okay. By the way, eventually the Supreme Court shot it down. The Supreme Court said that's a violation of liberty and privacy. People should not be required to do that. But we had asked that question in our Granville poll, and here's somebody's report from it. And what they hypothesized is that first of all, they just wondered, what does gender affect a person's acceptance of vaccine mandates? Okay, that was their general question, which then became a hypothesis, and you could just see. So here they introduced their poll in the introduction. Calvin Christian High School AP Government class conducted a poll in Granville. about some of the political issues. We sent out 180 surveys to random houses. We asked them to answer the questions. Okay, they're describing our poll. Easy to do. Okay, the students made inquiries. Blah 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 blah. Received 73 poll responses. One of the questions asked if the person believed a COVID vaccine mandate for businesses with over 100 employees. The author wants to know if gender affects. The author hypothesizes that women would be more likely to support a vaccine mandate. So that's where they jump in and they say, given what I've learned about socialization and political parties and some of the things we're talking about now, I really think that women are going to be more likely to support a vaccine mandate. Okay, so they have their hypothesis. Okay, now in their paper, they just need to answer that question. What did happen? And they need to do it. And here you see, I'm going to grab my remote, so hopefully I don't have to wander back to the screen. But yeah, here's where they find out what they did. In the responses, the students received for the question about a COVID mandate, 34% said yes, 60% said no, 5% were unsure. 36 of the respondents were male, and 37 were female. Below is the table. So then they listed out 30% of males would support a COVID mandate, whereas 37% of females would support a COVID mandate. So their hypothesis was supported, not strongly, but it was supported. And then after that, they kind of asked another question, which I talk about, looking at your data in different ways. So the author also wonders if conservatives would be more likely to oppose a COVID mandate. Yes, they would, because that was a huge thing about conservatism at that point and even now. And so they talk about that for a while. And then here's where they link it to a national poll. So a national tracking poll, and then they compare the national data to our data. Okay. Again, if you set it up right, it's real easy to discuss. Okay. And then at some point, you also have to evaluate our data. You have to say, was our data fair? The survey that students conducted wasn't a perfect representation of the actual thoughts of all people in Granville. And this is where you pull in some of the weaknesses that we have already talked about. Okay, and you talk about that, and then you finish by then summing it up and just saying, hey, if we could do this again, here's what I would do. Okay, so you have a sample poll, you have your poll research, assignment requirements, and hopefully you have an inquiring mind with what you would like to look at in ours. Okay, so all of these things are going to combine together in a poll report. And hopefully it all pulls together well. We might talk about it a little bit in class, but this video is going to be just an important way to kind of introduce you to it and get you working on it. Especially maybe this weekend when homework is going to be a little bit light, and this is a great way to get ahead because it's going to get real busy with a midterm coming up. So, and again, the key is to approach me if you have questions. So hopefully you got what I'm saying here and can enjoy starting to put this paper together. Thanks a lot.